The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, November 12th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Yochai Benkler, Harvard Law professor, author of Network Propaganda, Manipulation, Disinformation, and Radicalization in American Politics. Also on the program today, it's Veterans Day observed. And on the actual Veterans Day, Trump reminds us that nothing means anything anymore. Meanwhile, Rick Scott and the Republicans pretend something nefarious is happening in Florida and in Arizona as recounts begin in Florida in earnest. In Georgia, Stacey Abrams sues looking to count provisional ballots, of all things. Meanwhile, 31 dead in raging California wildfires. And in Brazil, the army chief cops to threatening the Supreme Court to jail Lula. Meanwhile, ICE imprisonments hit an all-time high, while 5,200 U.S. military personnel at border are doing $200 million worth of nothing. U.S. to stop Saudi refueling above Yemen in a completely meaningless gesture. Dems, meanwhile, prepare for investigations of the Trump administration, and the besieged and apparently highly investigated Matt Whitaker says he won't cut Mueller funding. And lastly, we have our first candidate for 2020, folks. Richard Ojeda, former West Virginia congressional candidate, throws his hat in for the Democratic nomination in 2020. All this and more on today's program. I'm fidgeting around in my seat. I just got a little bit of my sciatica acting up. Maybe that's because I really don't want to talk about 2020 yet. And so we're going to attempt to...
we have a new rule about this.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's a new rule only because we're stating it now. But it's a long-standing rule, which, of course, is you always wait until the lame duck session is over before you talk about the upcoming... the upcoming 2020 election. Yeah. Brendan just brought me over some Advil, and he brought me 12, which is fine. Yeah. I mean, I can take, you can take.
We don't want to hear you bitching today, boss.
I appreciate it. I really do.
That's what Brendan's the muscle guy. Brendan's like, oh my God, he's going to whine and bitch and motherfucker day. Get him as many pills as possible so he doesn't do the friggin' thing all friggin' day.
So that is the rule around here, ladies and gentlemen, in regards to the 2020 elections. But I'm sure that we will end up breaking that rule. But we will attempt to not. So, folks, today is the day when Veterans Day is celebrated. Yesterday was the actual Veterans Day. Veterans Day, if I'm not mistaken, started in this country. In many other countries, is known as Armistice Day, and I believe that we used to also call it Armistice Day here. And then we realized, like, oh, okay, we've got too many wars, so we're just going to include all veterans, all military veterans. But Donald Trump flew to France outside of Paris, I guess at the beginning of the weekend, ostensibly to celebrate or commemorate, I guess, Armistice Day, what most of Europe calls Armistice Day. We call Veterans Day. I guess we switched that in 1954. It is supposed to commemorate the anniversary of the end of World War I. And we're now, I guess, at 100 years. And Donald Trump flew to France, and then apparently it was raining. So he didn't go to the cemetery for the ceremony. He ultimately came out of his shell. Nobody's quite clear on why that is. I mean, aside from him being Donald Trump and completely disrespectful. And I have to tell you that, like, to a certain extent, I have a little bit of ambivalence about Veterans Day. We should not be creating more veterans at any point. With that said, you have people who gave up their lives, gave up their health, families who lost loved ones, and that should be recognized because that's a crappy situation to be in, to say the least. So those people deserve our respect. And certainly, when the president is going to a cemetery that represents the death, essentially, of millions of people, you'd expect maybe some measure of sacrifice on his part. If he was even remotely a normal human being. But the president is not. And here's an example of it. Even as he's reading off some of the vets who are with them, of course, not World War I vets, but World War II vets, he can't help but think about his situation at that very moment.
We have a number of amazing veterans with us today, including 6 veterans of World War II. James Blaine. James, where's James? James, thank you. Thank you, James. Frank DeVita. Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much. You look so comfortable up there under shelter as we're getting drenched. You're very smart people. Pete Dupre.
There you go. I can't help but look at you, think of all the suffering and the millions of people who died, and then remember it's about me getting wet. And look, I'm not a huge fan of Macron's politics, but I can appreciate the fact that he took the time to, at the very least, subtweet and humiliate Donald Trump in some fashion, as subtle as it was. Macron got up, gave a speech. I'm not sure if this was at the same location. I don't know that it was, but there was a couple of events, obviously, around Paris. And here he is, Macron, speaking about the difference between nationalism and patriotism. I imagine he was quite aware of Donald Trump's now proclivity to call himself a nationalist.
Cette vision de la France comme nation généreuse, de la France comme...
I should probably read the... we should probably do the... put the volume
Live
down.
translation
right,
by Sam Seder.
Right, and I have to tell you, je ne parle pas français. I am reading the translation that's there.
Fellow people of France.
Here we go. Just going to make it up. Here it is. All right, so it's This vision of France, continue. As a generous nation with a vision which carries universal values, has been, in those dark times, exactly the opposite of the selfishness of a people which looks only at its own interests, because patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. Nationalism is the betrayal of patriotism. By saying our interests first and never mind the others, you erase what is the most precious to a nation, what makes it exist, what makes it great, what is the most important, its moral values. And then Trump has a little bit of a scowl on his face. I don't know if that's coming up right at that moment, but it's quite clear who Macron is speaking to at that moment.
The primetime MSNBC lineup.
Right.
Rachel,
Exactly.
Chris, all of them, they like me very much. My people loathe me. I have no approval rating. I'm destroying the unions, but MSNBC very much.
Right, but MSNBC is not going to help him. I mean, I think on some level there is
Oh, this
value.
could help him in his domestic politics.
It could very well. And, you know, it is a problem for the United States long term that in France you can help yourself domestically by attacking the President of the United States. I mean, that is going to have long-term implications. You know, regardless of what it is, there was, you know, we didn't talk too much about the Jim Acosta, Donald Trump, you know, circus. But the bottom line is you see things like on Friday, Duterte's government is going to charge a veteran journalist and her online news startup with tax evasion. They're going to basically try and indict Maria Ressa, a reporter, and it's clear that they're doing it because she's critical of the government. And so when Donald Trump sets these markers down where it's okay for him to attack reporters in the way that he does, he's sending a message to these other worse regimes that, like, look, I'm certainly not going to be the one to hold you to account for this. When Saudi Arabia chops up a journalist in an embassy, they do so because they think they have the latitude to do that. And frankly, if it was up to Trump, they would have. Remember his first reactions. And you're not going to see these reactions in this country to what happens in the Philippines. And you're not going to see it in countries all around the world. I mean, this is what the State Department would have done, and they would have registered something that would have been, and there would have been a sense of, like, we have a certain amount of latitude. When the United States walks away from maintaining certain principles, or at least even like projecting that publicly, and of course, they do, you know, this is not to say that the United States doesn't support oppressive regimes. Of course we do. But even when the most basic of standards are washed away, even when the norms, even when the pretense, even if that's all it is in many instances, the pretense, it is washed away. It has bad implications. So we should keep that in mind for a while. Meanwhile, folks, big corporations are getting rich from selling your data. Congress has completely failed to save net neutrality or protect your privacy online. Now, internet providers and mobile carriers like Comcast and Verizon are free to restrict websites, spy on your online activity, sell your browsing history to advertisers. But with one click, ExpressVPN shields your online activity from internet and mobile providers. ExpressVPN is easy-to-use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, and tablet. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and hiding your public IP address. That has all sorts of uses, folks, including a tremendous amount of security. Get ExpressVPN protection for less than $7 a month. It's rated #1 VPN service by Tech Radar and comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you ever use public Wi-Fi and want to keep hackers and spies from seeing your data, ExpressVPN is the solution. I mean, look, there was a time, I think, back in the day where if you use a VPN, I mean, people would do it for like business quite a bit. But if you were a personal, like an individual and you use VPN, people in the know would be like, you're a little bit paranoid. These days, based upon how much data is settled, I was talking to Kyle. Kyle has basically taken all apps off his phone. The guy who develops our app.
You know what William S. Burroughs said?
What's that?
He said, a paranoid is someone with all the facts.
Right. Well, the bottom line is all your apps are following you. They're selling your data, whether you have them on or off at any given time.
Oh, my God. I had such a creepy experience with that over the weekend.
What was it?
Your phone is totally listening to you. I bought a robe, a fuzzy robe with a hood with ears on it at a thrift store in the middle of nowhere.
Nice.
And I said something about how I liked it at some point in time. Next day, my Instagram feed serves me an ad for a fuzzy robe with a hood with ears on it.
That's weird.
And I'm
Very
constantly fed. I had no idea where these anti-Semitic ads were coming from.
Yeah, right.
And I realized, wait a second, my phone's listening to my Sam impression.
Chablis ads and yoga.
I do get a lot of yoga,
folks,
Chablis, and protocols of the elders.
Take back your internet privacy today. Find out how you can get 3 months free. Go to expressvpn.com/majority. That's express, EXPRESSVPN.com/majority for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/majority to learn more. And remember, folks, you know that there are job sites that send you tons of the wrong resumes to sort through and make you wait for all the right candidates to apply to your job. That's not smart. But you know what is smart? Go into ZipRecruiter.com/majority to hire the right person. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Brendan knows this. Brendan is, there's some days we just make Brendan we just refer to him as the ZipRecruiter hire.
Hi, Brendan. I'm here from ZipRecruiter. You need any gel caps?
It's powerful matching technology, scans thousands of resumes, identifies people with the right skills, education, and experience for your job, and actively invites them to apply so you get more qualified candidates fast. We used ZipRecruiter when we hired Brendan, and it was a wealth of riches. No more sorting through the wrong resumes. No more waiting for the right candidates to apply. That's why ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the U.S. And folks, I am not the most organized person. This made it so easy. And now my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And ladies and gentlemen, as you can see today, I am almost fully shaven. I shaved. When did I shave? Maybe it was Saturday or I think it was Saturday. Well, you know how I shave, folks. Listen, we're getting close to Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa. Gift shopping for him can seem impossible. Thankfully, Harry's makes long-lasting quality products at a super reasonable price with sets just starting at $10. And if he doesn't love it, returns are quick and hassle-free. For years now, going on years, I have told you my favorite things about Harry's. The razor handle, sent to my door. When they narrowed the blade head, that was very important to me to get it up into the nostril area. I don't need to give you too much information, but
a little.
People see my face all the time. As a special offer for fans of the show, we've partnered with Harry's to give you $5 off any shave set, including our limited edition holiday sets, when you go to harrys.com/majority report. Plus, you'll get free shipping. The offer is for new and returning customers. Usually it's if you're a new customer. This is for new and returning customers, only available for the holidays. Each Harry's shaving set comes with the ergonomic weighted handle with an option to engrave, German-engineered 5-blade cartridges that provide a close, comfortable shave, foaming shave gel for rich lather, a travel cover to protect your blades, a handsome holiday gift box. Or get something for yourself. Redeem a Harry's trial offer to experience the quality of shave before committing. Get your holiday shopping done early. Free shipping ends on December 12th, so act now. Go to harrys.com/Majority Report. Get $5 off a shave set while supplies last. That's harrys.com/Majority Report. All right, quick break. When we come back, Yochai Benkler. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Yochai Benkler. He is a professor from Harvard Law, the Berkman Professor of Entrepreneurial Legal Studies there, author of multiple books, including his most recent with co-authors, Network Propaganda, Manipulation, Disinformation, and Radicalization in American Politics. Welcome to the program.
Thanks very much. Happy to be with you.
So I want to start. I guess let's start with just the methodology of the research that offers that provides the foundation for the book, and then I want to start with the history before we get to what your research found. But just give us a sense of what kind of research you were doing that formed the basis of this book.
So we at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, with our colleagues at the Center for Civic Media at MIT, have been developing a platform to analyze media ecosystems generally using very large data analysis. Essentially, we scrape and collect millions of stories, about 1 million stories a day from around the world. And we build it into a system that then allows us to search for more stories on a given topic, put them in a database, and allow us to analyze millions of stories, how they link to each other, what text they use, on which day, how they are tweeted, how they are shared on Facebook, or at least how often they're shared on Facebook. And with these materials, we then also add case studies where we do a deep dive into a particular topic, look at how television covered it using the Internet Archive of TV Web Archive. And this particular study, this particular book, is based on analyzing 4 million stories from April of 2015 until the first anniversary of the Trump presidency. Very heavy focus on the presidential election up until the election, and then more broadly on national politics since then.
And this dynamic is not well. All right, let's cut to the quick in terms of the broad strokes. In the course of your research, you essentially found that there are two large subsets of media consumers within politics: the right and essentially the center and the left as the second one. Tell us what the distinctions are between those two subsets.
So what we found is even more than just that the consumers are in two separate groups, but that the producers too are in two separate groups. So when you look at how media producers link to each other, that's to say, this has nothing to do with Facebook, nothing to do with Twitter. It's only, I'm writing a story, I'm publishing it online, I'm linking to other stories. This says something about how I, as the producer, am deciding who I give authority to, who I give credit to, and who I don't. And we also used how often sites were tweeted together. So, for example, if I'm somebody who tweeted a story from the New York Times and tweeted a story from the Washington Post on the same day, our network analysis would make the New York Times and the Washington Post close to each other. If I tweet Breitbart and Fox News on the same day, then Fox News and Breitbart will be on the same day. And that shows us the consumer side, what they're paying attention to. What we saw, both when we analyzed open internet, web-based linking, and when we looked at Twitter, and when we looked at Facebook, and even when we focused on text and who uses similar text, what we saw was a repeated pattern. The right wing, going from Fox and the New York Post all the way to Alex Jones and InfoWar and Gateway Pundit and Truthfeed and True Pundit and the craziest conspiracy sites, all have a single network. There are single insular networks where the producers link mostly to each other and the consumers read mostly that. By contrast, we didn't see anything parallel on the left. Instead, what we saw was all the way from relatively historically conservative, center-right, at least editorially, publications like the Wall Street Journal, all the way to mobilized networks publication like Daily Kos or historical left-leaning publications like Mother Jones, are all actually part of the same media ecosystem. They're all anchored in traditional media. They all link primarily to traditional media, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, etc. Their audiences also have a much more diverse media diet, and they read much more broadly across from left to center. So we don't really see a symmetric polarization where the left and right are each going off in its own way. What we see is that the right has spun off into its own insular system, and the rest has essentially become a single media ecosystem. And there's almost no center-right. There are almost no publications that you would today, historically were right, but today would you consider center-right. National Review, Weekly Standard, basically get no attention. Alex Jones today has a bigger audience than any of these historically conservative publications. There is no center-right. There's just a right and the rest.
And so what are, I mean, let's talk about the implications of the narrowness of the media I guess, diet and network. So both from a consumer and a production side, the narrowness of the right. Let's talk about the implications of that first before we get in, or maybe it's easier to talk about it, the implications relative to the diversity on the center left.
Essentially, what we saw, both in general in the structure and when we dug into specific case studies, was that the right operated on what we came to call the propaganda feedback loop. That is to say, each of the outlets on the right has to compete on ideological purity and feeding its audience more identity and bias confirming news. Whereas nobody on the right has any incentive, and in fact is strongly incentivized against saying, no, that's false. Actually, that's going too far. Let's be a little moderate. So what you don't see at all on the right is competition that is moderated by fact-checking and reality checking. The only way to differentiate yourself is to continue to be loyal to the identity-confirming narratives and to criticize others who step out of line. What we saw in the rest of the media ecosystem, including on the left, is that even when a crazy conspiracy theory did take root for a little while, because the audience pays attention to such a diverse set of media, because the media that get the most attention operate on a journalistic model that is fact-checking constrained, because even many of the outlets that are left-oriented operate in that journalistic model, the conspiracies don't survive long, and instead there's a tension between, on one hand, trying to get audiences by confirming their biases, which happens on the left as well, and on the other hand, not going too far out of line from what's reality, because then you get criticized from other sites that the left pays attention to. So the right operates purely on a propaganda feedback loop where they only repeat the same bias-confirming truths and nobody tries to constrain the other. Whereas on the left, you see a tension between efforts to confirm people's biases and make them feel good about the news, and at the same time being constrained by the fact that everybody still focuses on a reality check dynamic.
And we should say that this not only applies, to the media outlets themselves, but also to, theoretically, to the politicians, right? Because they end up being, in the all of the, I guess, the actors within what you could consider sort of the conservative world or the center-left world. So when I'm, even if I'm Speaker of the House, I've got to deal with essentially Fox News and everything that's around it. So I also have to, all of my incentives are to, at the very least, either be quiet or to actively confirm and support these sort of other narratives.
That's absolutely right. And again, we see this in the data. Essentially, think of it as a three-way interaction. Media outlets want audiences, and the audience gets attention, brings attention by enjoying the stories that confirm their beliefs. Politicians want audiences, and they want to confirm their beliefs because they also are attracted. Now, if the media outlets will always support and amplify what a politician who only says what audiences want to hear does, is that politician gets airtime. A politician that says, you know what, that's going too far, that's not true, will at best lose attention and lose their audience and their media outlets, and at worst be vilified and actually have the news outlets attack them for being too soft, as it were. And so essentially you have this three-way network of audiences, police media outlets, police each other, and police politicians to all toe the party line. Instead, what you have with the rest of the media ecosystem that covers the center, center-left, and left is that the outlets identify politicians who are lying and criticize them as well. The politicians who want to compete on being reality-based actually have an audience that can tell the difference between truth and fiction rather than just between what fits and doesn't fit the party line. So the politicians face completely different media and audience incentives on the left than on the right. The outlets face completely different incentives and sources of discipline, and the audiences therefore face a completely different media ecosystem. And on the right, there's simply reinforcement of towing the party line and competing on who can do it in a more pure and extreme way. Whereas on the left, you get this balance between trying to appeal to your voters' preferences, but at the same time being constrained by a media ecosystem that will hold you to the facts of what you say.
So what accounts for this difference? I mean, this is because, and I think, I mean, is it simply, I mean, what accounts from to the extent that you have a sense, what accounts for this difference?
So the first thing that we need to learn from this difference is that most of current debates about what's happened to American political media has focused on technology, whether it's the Facebook algorithm or fake news clickbait spammers, or whether it's Russian bots, or most of the stories, whichever they were, had a strong technological component. Because both of these populations are actually at the same technological frontier. And in fact, if you look at youth surveys, people on the left are younger generally and therefore use the technology more, whereas people on the right depend more heavily on traditional media like television and radio. You can't keep blaming the technology. That's not where most of the action is. Instead, you need to look at a story that you can't find from our data. And in the book, what we do is we step away from the data and we start looking at the history of the last 50 years of media policy, of political culture, of technology. And the story we tell actually has very little to do with Facebook's algorithm and a lot to do with what allowed Rush Limbaugh to invent the outrage industry as a major new business model that makes millions.
And so, I mean, let's talk about that because, you know, having been an AM talk radio vet that entered into this in many respects to specifically deal with Rush Limbaugh at a time, you know, when YouTube did not exist, when Facebook was something that just like college kids maybe, you know, vaguely knew. Twitter did not exist at that time. This was the dynamic, in some respects, to the extent that we had a precursor to social media, talk radio was it in many respects. So, I mean, I think people are familiar with what happened with the Fairness Doctrine being rolled back. It allowed for Rush Limbaugh to go on 3 hours a day. But what else was it? Why did the right adopt that model and the left never really pursued it? Or was it, I mean, how conscious of an activity was it by the right to pursue this?
So I think there are several elements that we explain in the chapter on the origins of asymmetry in the book. And first of all, there's a component that has to do with the political realignment of the Republican Party. Essentially, after 1968, with the adoption of the Southern Strategy, you see a shift of a strong component of the Republican coalition becoming a white identity audience that is captured within the Republican Party because it's rejecting the civil rights movement. Then in the 70s, you see evangelical Christians who were present but not politically mobilized, being mobilized by the success of the women's movement to protect a traditional patriarchal family, and resulting in the rise of the moral majority. These two audiences, the Christian evangelicals who got into it through televangelism and the Christian Broadcasting Network, that was the third most watched radio network in the 1980s, and Christian Broadcasting, alongside Rush Limbaugh and talk radio, created a base of within the audience that was a large, coherent group that provided a commercial audience for this model. The second thing that happened is that in 1996, in addition to the repeal in 1987 of the Fairness Doctrine that you mentioned, in 1996 there was also repeal of group ownership rules that allowed Clear Channel to emerge as a major player in radio, that allowed Sinclair to emerge as a major player in broadcasting, companies whose names you don't really know, but that actually, in the case of Clear Channel, owned stations from coast to coast, including buying the producer of Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, Hannity on radio. So now you essentially have a seamless network of radio stations, coast to coast, practically 24 hours a day, selling this outrage and hatred as a form of candy, essentially. It makes you feel good about your identity if you agree with it, and you tune into it, and it draws you in, and it gives you a sense of community in this base anchor. So the right moved early. The right relied on deregulation and the emergence of technologies of abundance, be they AM radio first, then increased channel capacity, and later on the internet, to harvest the benefits from this new audience. On the left, you had, first of all, the fact that the right moved first meant that traditional journalistic outlets also gave political confirmations to people on the left. The more that the right was stuck in its propaganda feedback loop, the more just telling things how they are already reinforces you as somebody who's left in your beliefs, because now you're getting all of the benefit of mainstream journalism turning toward the right and saying that's false. So that was one element, the fact that the right was a first mover. It's entirely possible, at least in theory, that had the left moved first, it would have been reversed. The other thing is that the coalition on the left is much more diverse and doesn't have this very large coherent center of white identity and Christian voters, and instead has, so if you look at radio, black communities are largely considered a market of their own. Latinx communities are largely considered of their own. NPR is largely a highly journalistic organization, but with an editorial tilt or a feel that serves and reinforces left beliefs in that regard, more like the Wall Street Journal, obviously, than like Fox. So for somebody like Air America to come along, for MSNBC to suddenly rechange its practices in 2006, they're already competing with, for an audience that is getting some of its partisan kicks simply from truth-seeking journalism. They're aiming for a much more broad and diverse audience without the same core of what provides the bread and butter of the right-wing media. And by the time the internet sites come along, on the right, the outrage industry has been around for 20 years. The audience knows what to expect. You can't compete anywhere else. On the left, it becomes much harder to compete completely separate from reality, and instead we see this more constrained partisanship, even from outlets that try to be more partisan.
Let me just bounce this theory, that pet theory of mine that I've had for some time, in terms of like explaining the development of this, and I wonder if any of your research or just your thoughts just in general, that on the right there is aside from the structure that they have built, just broadly speaking, there's a lot more money available for this type of stuff. I mean, Rush Limbaugh and all of right-wing talk radio on some level is subsidized by ideological money. I mean, maybe we can, whether it's the Heritage Foundation or through Hillsdale College or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And broadly speaking, I think we see that on the right online as well. Is there a difference in the incentive structure of just the audiences and the producers? Is it, on the left, it seems to me much of the material of the center left is, generated from academia, where the incentive structure, where the reward system is slightly different than on the right. On the right, it seems to be, how effective can you be at entering certain things into the society's media bloodstream? On the right, and on the left, it is how sound is your reporting, or how sound, does it withstand scrutiny, and that those fundamental differences in the way that one as a producer gets compensated just by, peer respect versus actual dollars adds to this dynamic that's already existing.
So I think it's important to separate two very distinct phenomena. For me, based on our research, the major transition point on the belief structure on the right had to do with the fact that Rush Limbaugh found a new business model, because big money supported right-wing publications from right after World War II on. Essentially, if you look at the National Review, Nicole Hemmer has a beautiful book called Messengers of the Right that looks at that first generation of post-war right-wing media. And what she shows there is that they essentially never became a business model. They sold some, they had relatively low circulation, and they relied partly on reader or listener contributions and partly on contributions from rich benefactors, exactly the model that you're describing. What was new about Rush Limbaugh, what was new about Fox News, is that they no longer depended on that kind of politically mobilized money, but instead actually found a business model that drew audiences that were loyal enough and large enough to actually make it big advertising business. So there, on the media side, I'm not persuaded by the story that it's about big money paying for them to do it, rather than just that they were able, because of all the reasons I described, to turn right-wing mobilized media from a partisan, narrow, and big money-funded enterprise into mass media, big business, and now online, clickbait, and online advertising business. What is, I think, correct about what you say is the flow of, shall we call it, higher status or research, not status so much as research type work, where essentially from right after the war with the World War II, with the Heritage Foundation, with the Foundation for Economic Freedom, and going through Cato but particularly Heritage, the American Enterprise Institute, you saw a strategy on the right of creating a whole set of research organizations whose role was to produce right-wing viewpoint confirmation throughout the story. Now, some of them are very politically mobilized and specific, like Judicial Watch, or like the Mercer-funded, Bannon co-founded Government Accountability Initiative, and some of them are much more serious think tanky type things. Those really do operate in a way that's very different from academia. And again, there's this imbalance where when you're inside a framework that depends on politically aligned donors, and you don't have the institutional constraints of academia, you certainly do see much more motivated research. It's not that you don't see academically mobilized research in the academia as well, in the university as well, but here you get institutional constraints that, at least for the more serious research, impose a much more serious constraint. So on that level of high quality, data-informed narratives that come into the media, I think your dynamic of money making a difference is important. On the media culture itself, I really do think it was a transformation of the business model to allow for advertising-based hate-stoking outrage industry to emerge.
One of the things that I feel like that technology has changed in some way. I mean, and I'm looking back at 2004. There was a meme in 2004 which was Drudge rules their world, and that was to articulate the efficacy of the sort of the way that the right wing narratives sort of entered into the society's bloodstream in some way, that it would go from Fox News or some of these sort of like quasi think tank institutions through Drudge, and then every producer at ABC News, NBC News, CBS News, at CNN would read Drudge, and Drudge would basically provide them their editorial decisions of the day. And to some degree, it seems like that social media in particular, but even starting with the blogs, started to push back on that in some way. And the dynamic changed to where it was almost if there was a realization amongst the right that, like, we don't even need to have the ABCs, CBSs, and NBCs buy this story anymore. Largely, we can just sort of maintain this narrative in our own bubble. We don't even need it to be validated anymore by the broader society. And yet, we still saw an example of, like, Steve Bannon going out and laundering Clinton cash through the organization that you just cited. Can you tell me about that dynamic, about how, on one hand, the right seems to be now sort of self-sufficient in terms of the narrative, and in other instances, we still have this sort of like mainstreaming of what essentially function as right-wing conspiracies?
So this is actually a really important point. But before I even start that, you mentioned Drudge. Drudge is still critically important. If you look at similar web traffic at one of the web traffic analysis firms, it looks like something like half of Alex Jones's InfoWars traffic comes from links from Drudge. Much more important than Facebook or Twitter or any other source for InfoWars. So Drudge is still important within that ecosystem in a really quirky way. But you asked, I think, a more important question, which is the role of mainstream traditional media in disseminating the crazy on the right. And I think it's our book. We have a chapter dedicated to failures of mainstream media. We have a chapter specifically around the ways in which, as you describe, Breitbart and Bannon use the New York Times. The thing that's important to remember is that even though we don't know exactly how many people live fully inside the feedback loop, that's not the entire Republican electorate. So if you look, for example, at surveys and the question of, is the press the enemy of the people? It's shocking that 51% of Republicans in August of 2018 tell the Quinnipiac poll that they think that the press is the enemy of the people. But at the same time, that's only half. it's shocking that 48% of Trump voters tell a YouGov poll in December of 2016 that they think that emails showed that someone was running a pedophilia ring out of Clinton's campaign. But it's 48%. There's that roughly half-ish of Republican voters, could be as few, could be as much as 25% of that of the population generally, could be as little as 15. We're not quite sure whether a quarter or a third of the population lives squarely inside the Fox News Breitbart universe, but it's certainly not all Republican voters. And this is the critical role that mainstream media played in taking those stories and generalizing to the public, because that's where the people who spend some of their time on Fox News, but much of their time on ABC, CBS, NBC, those are the people who really got confounded by mainstream media. So the story that you note, the story of Clinton Cash, was just a brilliant piece of information operation from Bannon. Literally 2 years before the election, it was clear that he already knew that the primary contenders would be Clinton and Bush and Jeb Bush, and he had the Government Accountability Initiative wrote a couple of books. One was called Clinton Cash, the other was called Bush Bucks, and they were both basically concocted conspiracies about how horrible, terrible, no good each one of these two families were in terms of selling the store of American politics for donors. In the case of Clinton, it was primarily Clinton Foundation. The trick with the Clinton Foundation was to then come and give the New York Times an exclusive 18 months before the election. An exclusive. So the Times went, they read the book, they followed up, and they came out with a big story. And the story had the blaring headline, "Cash flows to Clinton Foundation amid transfer of uranium to Russian firms." Sounds terrible. Somewhere in paragraph 15 or 17, there's buried, there was no evidence of wrongdoing, but still it raises issues. That story became the third most linked to story in the entire campaign story. A story from April of 2015 became the third most linked to story of all the Times stories throughout the entire election period.
Wow.
Because it was used by the right to reinforce and confirm and get a sense of validation for this story. So again, we document over and over again how the right-wing outlets are essentially teasing and putting things into the stream of mainstream media. The email releases had the same effect, and it's the inability of editors to keep the headlines consistent with the facts and the wish to sort of draw people in that ends up amplifying and validating these conspiracy stories that come from the right. So what is, if you have it, what is the solution to this? Or what is there anything out there that can mitigate this dynamic? I mean, how do you pierce a bubble like that? So first of all, we start ruefully the chapter on solutions with, if our diagnoses had been simpler and more technical, we would have been able to give you better technocratic solutions. These are deep structural problems of political culture and media culture. There are no easy solutions. I would say that the single most important thing that can happen, and we don't have this in the book yet because the data stopped at the beginning of 2018, but impressionistically, it seems like this is getting through to editors and newsrooms. The most important thing is that traditional professional journalists and editors need to understand that they are in a deeply asymmetric propaganda system, and that when they are propagating the stories from the right, they are essentially complicit. So the old model of plain objectivity in traditional media was to be neutral. Side says this, says that, side that said the other thing, and I'm just telling you what both sides says. When you have such dramatic asymmetry, to be objective by being neutral systematically makes you someone who validates falsehood from the right. And so you need to change the culture. And you're seeing already media willing to call out lies from the president, in particular from Trump, in a way that would have been inconceivable 5 years ago. Also, we have levels of lying that would have been inconceivable 5 years ago. So that's obviously pushing it. But so you need a change in professional media culture. That's the most important thing. Ultimately, it will require sustained losses by the Republicans so that they realize that it's a losing strategy and begin to walk things back on their own. But that's obviously out of the hands of anybody trying to create solutions. There are discrete things we can do. I think there's no doubt that we need immediate, substantial reform to introduce transparency into political advertising. The one thing we don't know is how effective the Facebook targeted advertising was for the Trump campaign in particular, and in particular how much dark ads, essentially ads that only very, very narrow sets of people see. So there are proposals like the Honest Ads Act that are on the table. Those won't solve the whole problem, but they're an important basic infrastructure for us to know what's going on. We need some accountability for the platforms, greater transparency to what's going on. And there's some initiatives primarily in Europe now around creating those. I doubt that those will come out in the U.S. soon. So we need to focus on the platforms because within 5, 10, 15 years, they will be the dominant source. But because so much of what's central now is happening still on cable TV and on radio, it's very hard to come up with solutions that are consistent with the First Amendment, other than this main shift in the practices of journalists and editors.
I'll tell you what scares me is that I think that the changes that we've seen in those journalists has been a function of Trump. But when we see, like, just for this, this weekend where we see things like Rick Scott saying, starting to talk about fraud in Florida, and in fact, this is getting repeated, and they're allowing Republican politicians and others to repeat this, even though Rick Scott himself has not called the police. He's the governor. He has the ability to investigate these things. I get a little worried that Trump allows the media to sort of say, like, hey, look, we're doing that. We're being skeptical, but then just sort of like leave it to just as if it was a Trump phenomena rather than the entire structure of a machine that brought Trump really to where he was, right? Like, the machine preceded Trump, right? I mean, that's you had to have a machine
absolutely
that was telling both its producers and its consumers, hey, Barack Obama may not be an American, for Trump to sort of ride that wave into office in some way.
I think that's exactly right. I think although Trump is both a symptom of a much longer outrage industry and a catalyst. You can't ignore, and we show it in the data, particularly in the chapter on immigration. He has this call and response relationship with right-wing media ecosystem, as well as with the mainstream media. And he is a real catalyst. He's not the source of the problem. He is definitely a symptom of years of the propaganda feedback loop on the right operating as we describe it. But he has certainly learned how to not only be a consequence, but be a real catalyst. And you can't ignore the fact that he's made things much worse, and he's essentially made it into the official policy of the United States to call the media the enemy of the people. But I agree with you that he makes it too easy, that in some sense, professional journalists have not quite focused on how pervasive this phenomenon is in the Republican Party. And look, the more Trump succeeds with it, the more politicians on the right will follow him. People follow success. It'll have to show itself as a failure. and even the debate over whether or not the midterm was a blue wave or not is precisely a debate on whether the Trump strategy was a success or a failure. And I think the sense that emerged in the first day and that slowly we're learning was false, that there was no blue wave, has allowed him to continue to project this persona of a success. And as long as he's a success, people on the right will try to follow and copy him.
I appreciate your hanging with me for so long. A couple more questions, because I just found this really fascinating. How do we know, how do we know the power of cable news and of these narratives in terms of I think it's easier to understand how they impact our politics in terms of almost legislatively, because many of the politicians themselves, they're bathed in this. But when we talk about cable news, for instance, we're talking about, I don't know, a whole universe of 5 or 10 million people maybe who watch all this stuff. And shows like this one, I mean, there's not, but how do we know that actually that it makes a difference? When we rail on somebody for trafficking in some type of conspiracy, how do we know from the data that this makes any type of difference, or how does that manifest itself?
So there are two ways. One is not stuff that we do. We just survey it from others, and that's survey. So Pew goes out and asks voters, what is your primary source of news, or what news source do you most trust? And there you get very clearly that when Pew, right after the election, asked Trump voters, what news sources what is your most important news source, 40% said Fox. Only about 7% said Facebook. So you know that Fox is much more important. On the left, just as we found with our own data, in the same survey, you see a much longer and smoother distribution of attention with other sites. Similarly, in our own data, if you look at attention, so take the Seth Rich conspiracy that DNC staffer leaked the DNC memos rather than that the Russians hacked it. Right after Seth Rich was murdered in Washington, D.C. as part of a robbery, there was a bubbling on the net of various fringe sites, maybe Russian-inspired sites, that was trying to say, no, it was Seth Rich, it wasn't anybody else. There was a moment where it spiked a little bit around WikiLeaks releasing a prize for whoever kills, and therefore implying that, in fact, he was the source. When you plot the amount of attention it got overall online during that early period when the more online extreme and WikiLeaks only propagation happened, to a period on the week in which Comey was fired, when Hannity and Fox and Friends and Fox DC even propagated the same conspiracy theory, that later time dwarfs several times over the amount of coverage and attention online there was to the fringe. And we see this again with the Uranium One story that was part of what we talked about with regard to the Bannon Breitbart. That happened the same thing. It was big, but it was overwhelmed in November of 2017 when things were going badly in the Mueller investigation for Trump, when suddenly Fox News, morning, noon, and night for a month, took on this Uranium One story, completely recoded it as a story about how Mueller and Rod Rosenstein and Andrew McCabe had helped Obama give the Russians 20% of American nuclear capabilities. I kid you not. It's that crazy.
No. I know that story well. It's sad to say.
So when you look at our measures of attention online, it's very clear that when it makes it in a big way to Fox, it dominates what happens when it stays only online.
Yeah.
So that gives us a real level of confidence when you combine both the surveys of what people say they care about and the measures of what they search, Google Trends or whatever it is that we're using, that cable is really driving these beliefs.
I mean, I would imagine. I mean, certainly we saw that with the caravan too, and I would imagine that there is, and I'm sure it's been done in the past, and maybe we'll see it with this. There will be data that associates. Fox will explain why there were sort of disparate types of people reacting to one message or another in the context of these midterms. All right. So lastly, let me just ask you this, because when I talked about what can be done, much of it relied on the producers to responsibly, assess, what they were going after. And like I say, with the caravan, we saw that completely break down, right? Like nobody's covering the caravan anymore because there really is not a terribly relevant story to the American public about it.
There never was.
There never was. I mean, to the extent that there was any, it was just like, these guys are saying the caravan's important. We're not going to go down to the caravan because the caravan in itself is not important. We're just covering how these guys are saying, a ghost is important. And they weren't even able to provide that type of restraint. So aside from relying on the producers, what can the consumer or let's say citizens can do? Is there anything that they can do, or is it just like, let's hope for better editors?
So it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. In a universe where you think that everybody is confused and doesn't know what the truth is, you say, teach yourself, read a more diverse diet and all of that. In a universe that's consistent with our results, people don't not know. They know what they're getting. There are people who consume conspiracy theories are not, or particularly not so much conspiracy theories at the extreme, but just the mainstream Fox News-driven outrage. The people who consume that enjoy it. It's entertainment. It makes you feel good about yourself. To come to somebody and say, no, the thing you believe. Remember, in a Pew report, when you ask consistently liberal people, consistently conservative people, what their most trusted news outlets were, they said Fox News, Hannity, Limbaugh, and Glenn Beck. They trust them. They pay attention to them. It makes them feel good about themselves to listen to them. What are you going to tell them? You're wrong. You should change. You should let go of everything that gives you meaning and makes you happy. Because it's inconsistent with reality as I understand it. I don't know that there's a solution based on users, on readers and viewers. I think people are stuck in the system they're stuck, in the structure that they're stuck, and if you can identify levers where you can change the structure, then people might slowly start to climb down off the limb they're on. And in that regard, the most important people are the people who are not yet fully in the grip of the Fox News Breitbart universe, but are only 1 foot in. Those are the people who, in some sense, can still be brought back to something like reality. And that needs to be the initial focus in my view.
The book is Network Propaganda, Manipulation, Disinformation, and Radicalization in American Politics, authored by Yochai Benkler and co-authors Robert Farris, Hal Roberts. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. Professor, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time today.
Thank you. It was lovely to spend time with you.
All right, folks. Yeesh. So there you have it. See you in a year. I don't know what. Well, I mean, I think, one of the things I think that we try and do here is, grab those people before they just fall down that rabbit hole. I still contend that, if anybody wants to give me $10 million, I will do some leases on some low-powered FM stations in in half a dozen states, and we'll get this thing going.
Oh, get AM stations too.
That's what I'm saying. Low-powered. Did I say FM?
Yeah.
Oh, I meant yes, low-powered AM stations.
Both.
I would
All
even
of
go
the
before
above.
the FM. I would go AM first. I don't know why I said FM.
I was taking notes because I feel like the left should be radicalizing people too with our media, but we care a little more about the truth, so that's a problem.
That is the problem. I mean, that is the problem. You do not see.
And here is a solution. Did you hear that new Ted Cruz story? We'll get to it in the fun half.
Oh, well, there you go.
Baseless speculation and
That's right.
innuendo.
It would
I
be,
can do that.
At one point, it was a meme back in the day, even pre-meme. It would be irresponsible not to speculate, is what we used to say. I can't
That is
remember.
such a dick line.
It actually came from a right-wing outlet, or I can't remember if it was the Bush administration. Somebody said that it would be
It was
irresponsible not to
Bob
speculate.
Garfield of On the Media.
And I don't think it was. Folks, we're going to head into the fun half. Just a reminder, this program relies on you who is listening. Maybe not you today, maybe you yesterday, or maybe you tomorrow, but maybe you today. It is our members who make this show possible. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com. When you go there, spend a couple of bucks a week supporting this program. We say thank you by giving you extra content every day, and we're able to push this show along. I'm looking into technology right now. Now, we were just speaking to Yochai Benkler. He was in Spain. And so we talked to him on the cell phone, and it was the sound was not optimal. There's only so much we can do. I can't arrange to have Yochai Benkler go to an NPR studio in Spain. But there are technologies we're looking at that might help with that. And so when you become a member, that's what we do. Pour it into trying to make the show better in some fashion for you. So again, jointhemajorityreport.com. Tomorrow on this program, we'll have a special announcement about a way in which you could see us in the flesh. As you know, Michael's doing a show, TMBS, in Brooklyn in February. And I have, because of a court order, I can't go anywhere near that building for like a couple days before, and like literally, there's a whole circumference that I'm like a radius that I'm not allowed to go.
Oh, that's too bad. I was actually hoping to offer you probably like a half price ticket.
I thought
if you want to come sit in the audience.
That's the way he says it in this, but we're researching who filed that restraining order. So with that said,
Whoa. Sorry. I thought of actually a funny line, but I'm impressed with how I restrained myself from saying it.
Well, there you go. But we will have an announcement.
But it would be irresponsible to not speculate as to who that joke might have been about.
I don't even want to go there.
Yeah,
but we'll have an announcement tomorrow on this program. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. Also, JustCoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code Majority. Get 10% off. Speaking of TMBS, you're actually going to do some work this week.
Indeed. 2 different shows this week. And tomorrow, Malaika Jabali is joining us. She has a really good piece in Current Affairs called The Color of Economic Anxiety, which deals with a New York Times profile on African-American voters that didn't go out and vote in 2016 and rebranding what we mean when we talk about the working class. It follows up with the Bill Fletcher Jr. conversation very well, plus a mini primer, which will lead to a illicit history on what happened in Florida in 2000. And then on Friday, Corey Pine is back along with ContraPoint. She'll be joining us. And and I'll talk about this more as the week goes on. And definitely get your tickets to the show for February 1st at the Bell House. Can't wait to see you there. The link is available on the homepage of majority.fm.
Jamie.
Yeah, so out now on the Antifada, we have an interview with Jay Firestone, who wrote an amazing piece for Commune Magazine that's going a bit viral called 3 Months Inside Alt-Right New York. about his secret mission infiltrating various alt-right and alt-light groups like the Proud Boys, gathering information on them. We talked about what the experience was like for him, who these people are, how the groups interact with each other, how they view Trump, as well as various kinds of anti-fascist tactics, and why only communism can fight fascism in the long run.
Matt.
Hope Leslie finally did the episode on Hope Leslie, a book by Catherine Maria Sedgwick, 1827. Check it out. It's on YouTube, patreon.com/literary hangover.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. Headed to the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number. See you in the fun half. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Excuse me. Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen. This is, speaking of... No, speaking of the right wing creating conspiracies, and that this comes not only in this relationship between the producers and the audience and these like sort of smaller producers and Fox. Here you have a politician promoting this garbage and then also being allowed to present it on non-bat crap crazy stations simply because of their status, right? Like, oh, he's a senator, so we're going to let him say whatever he wants. We saw this on MSNBC too. Chuck Todd had this guy on. He said the same bull crap and was not essentially laughed off. This is the functional equivalent. What was that guy's name? Jeffrey Lord Like this is, if Jeffrey Lord said this, you would see some pushback. There is zero evidence for what we're about to hear Cory Gardner say. I mean, this guy's already trying to, protect his reelect, or I don't know. When is this guy up for? Did he just win an election, Cory Gardner? He did not. This sounds like a guy who's afraid of a primary challenge. That's what it sounds like.
Turn
to
out
me.
the pay-pays.
Here is Cory Gardner, senator from Colorado, correct? On CNN's State of the Union.
Because, a vote that's cast in Yuma shouldn't be disqualified under the same provision that qualifies a vote in Maricopa. A legally cast vote, wherever it is legally cast, should count the same, not with differing standards amongst the offices.
I know, but your organization accused an election official of cooking the books, and I don't see any evidence of any illegality. There are questions about, if you want to get technical here, about what emergency voting is in Maricopa County. The law is very vague. Maricopa County set up 4 emergency voting stations before Election Day, 2 of them, by the way, in Republican areas, Mesa and Scottsdale, and different counties interpret that vague law in different ways. That's not cooking the books, and I keep hearing the organization you chair accuse people of breaking the law, and I don't see evidence of it.
Yeah, if you're a voter in Arizona and you cast a vote in Yuma and you cast a vote in Phoenix, legally you did it the same, and your vote in Yuma is disqualified, your vote in Maricopa is not disqualified. Is that fair?
I defer to the.
Is that fair?
I defer to the governor and the Secretary of State of Arizona. They're both Republicans, and they say everything is going according to how it should be going. Now, if you have issues with county by county election processes, whether it's in Florida or Arizona, then I don't want to stand in the way of you introducing legislation saying every state has to do it the exact same way. But if the Republican governor
I'm not talking about federalizing elections. I'm talking about the state of Arizona.
I bet you're not.
Legislation. I think federalizing the elections would be a bad idea. I think making sure that if you're in Arizona, that the
pause it. Let's be clear on what's going on here. And this is the same thing that they argued in Florida in 2000 too, which was you can't recount these ballots that got screwed up in this in West Palm Beach, because what about the guys in the Panhandle? How come they don't get a recount? This is sheer BS, and good for Jake Tapper for calling him out. Sheer BS. We're going to keep playing it, but the idea of avoiding the solution to this. If you really think it's a problem, remember, the election's controlled by Republicans in Florida and in Arizona. And if you really think it's a problem, why not federalize it? You just made a good case. If it's true with someone in Zuma and Maricopa, why shouldn't it be true with someone in Maricopa and Albany? Or in, I don't know, Chattanooga?
I think federalizing the elections would be a bad idea. I think making sure that if you're in Arizona, that the vote you cast legally counts. I think that's what we're trying to do. That's what was reached.
Sure.
That's the agreement that was reached in Arizona, and I think that's a good outcome.
But where's the evidence that anybody was cooking the books?
Well, we had evidence that people were treating ballots differently. And again, this is about the integrity of when you go and cast a ballot, you don't expect yours to be disqualified under a provision that would allow a ballot to be counted somewhere else. I don't think that's fair. So that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Whose ballots were being disqualified? My understanding of the situation is that what happened was in Maricopa County, they had 4 emergency voting stations set up in the county. By the way, it's a county that Joe Arpaio won. I mean, it's a mixed county, and Republicans and Democrats both can win in that county. And that's what happened. It's not like people in Yuma County were not allowed to vote. It's just that this elections official set up 4 emergency voting stations throughout the county, including in Scottsdale and Mesa, which are Republican-leaning.
Well, I think I've answered the question. We just want to make sure that every vote counts and that every vote that's legally cast is counted.
What?
Cooking the books, exactly.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Cooking the books is another way of saying count all the ballots.
Make sure everybody's vote is fairly counted.
Make sure everybody's vote's fairly counted. In a sense, that's fraud against people who lose elections if all votes are counted. So if you think about it, it's basically doubly unfair. Whoa. Federalized elections.
Right. I mean, Cory Gardner's making a great argument as to why we need to federalize elections. And I'll tell you why he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to do that for the same reason why the Republicans were adamant about destroying the Voting Rights Act. Because once you actually federalize elections, once you say that we're going to maintain a certain bottom of standards as to what practical ways that people can vote, what are the laws so that they're not confusing, you basically disallow all of the suppression tactics that Republicans use in states by states by states. And so, of course, they don't want to federalize this. Because if they federalize it, I mean, can anybody come up with any reason from a practical standpoint, even from a theoretical standpoint? If you believe that somebody in Zuma or Yuma or wherever in Arizona or in any given state has the same right to vote as somebody else within that state, why wouldn't you say that from state to state?
Competition would start kicking in.
Yeah, because then there would be an incentive to produce the best voting systems possible. And then the states would compete against each other, and then we would have the most efficient system. But if you locked it down with the federal bureaucracy, then innovation would be stifled.
Right.
Boom, suck it.
Right.
Wow.
And
They're
also,
so
I mean,
friggin' easy to be a libertarian pundit.
Yeah, but it's so easy to get efficiencies from scale, right? Like you have to recreate this.
I don't know. Things just get big and stuff, and that just concerns me. See you in reason.
Oh my God, Michael, where'd you get that those new leather shoes?
Exactly. Where did you get those Italian loafers?
Unbelievable.
Where did you get that Armani suit?
All right,
before
folks.
it was even shipped to the States.
Now that we're talking about the vote, you know what's really annoying to people like, I don't know, old man Lou Dobbs and whatnot, is when they can't go on air and give a definitive answer as to who won an election if it's super close. Now, we didn't see them complain about this in past elections, just this one, because it turns out that we just had a midterm that had 49% of voters. It's not enough. Should be closer to like 95%. But it is the highest turnout rate for a midterm in 104 years in this country. By far the highest number of voters, 115 million voters. But in terms of percentage, the highest percentage in 104 years. This is where the libertarian pundit comes in and goes, that's why we need to control our population, to get it back down to where it was 105 years ago so we can get midterm participation up. But with that said, many people voted absentee. Many people voted early because, of course, of Republican shenanigans. They wanted to make sure they were eligible to vote, and people were excited to vote. That's a problem. What? I'll explain. Listen to Lou Dobbs.
This is a bit of a departure, but not too much. The idea of early voting, that has overtaken much of the country, extends election day across weeks and weeks, and we're left.
It does not extend election day over weeks and weeks, because that would mean you would start on election day and it would go much further. No, election day ends at the exact same time that it has always ended, folks.
It's not a Tuesday that lasts 3 weeks now?
No, it's not a Tuesday that lasts until December.
But like, if you love democracy, wouldn't you want it to last as long as possible?
Well, you need a result at one point, but you should count all the ballots. That's all we're talking about.
Somebody said it's a republic, not a democracy. Boy, that was a great point.
And we're left with this situation where election day is no longer election day. No. And it sounds like, and looks like, and feels like a recipe for immense fraud on the part of the...
Well, it's coming. I mean, I think there's a lot of fraud that goes on already, and I think more and more are coming as time goes on.
They're coming
so
in the caravan.
What's the rationale for this? This makes no sense. Either have a vote or don't have a vote. Why not have voter ID for crying out loud?
Pause it. Wait, what? Wait a second. Voter ID now is going to affect absentee balloting?
It's going to slow it down, actually.
Since when was don't have a vote on the table?
This is like, you know, you're about 4 or 5 days out from Thanksgiving. You just have like a real smattering of leftovers. You're just going to throw it all into a pot and cook it. Let's
answer the question.
I'm all for that. I also think, to a certain extent, in these national elections, the federal government has a role, not to take over the day-to-day. But just in the sense of the law enforcement side of it and what have you.
Pause it. Wait a second. The federal government has a role in elections just on the law enforcement side?
Like, Luke, calm down. I mean by not letting black people vote.
There is a way to ensure federal law enforcement to get involved. That means you passed a standard on a federal level. You're going to have the federal election police force come in and have to learn the rules from 50 different states. Is that the idea?
And the Civil Rights Act has always had people in there making sure that people's rights aren't being violated. But there's a lot of other people who don't fall on the civil rights.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that's a great point. We need a white can vote act. Well, you know what? Let's reach across the aisle and have federal standards for the vote so that we don't see any of this mishmash.
That being said, I'd like to take us on a little trip down memory lane, which Sam, I'm assuming you probably know about this. I don't remember how I found this out, but this is from a New York Times report, June 15th, 1994. Ed Rollins, who we just saw in that clip, who also looked pretty crusty and sad at that point as well, offers an apology to black ministers in person. Like a sinner to the altar, Ed Rollins returned New Jersey to taste, seeking forgiveness from black ministers he once boasted that he bought. The Republican campaign consultant stood before the Black Ministers Council church basement here and apologized for claiming last November that he helped Governor Christine Todd Whitman win election by suppressing black voter turnout.
MFer, I want more iced tea.
At the time,
Ross Perot or something?
No, this was 94. This is just the governor's race. At the time, Mr. Rollins told reporters that Whitman campaign had paid black ministers not to encourage their congregants to vote for Governor Jim Florio. He quickly recanted, and a federal inquiry found no evidence of such payments. My behavior was inexcusable, and I do come here with a deep sense of remorse, he said, his voice steady, his hands slightly trembling. I regret what I said. It wasn't true.
How did it go today? Well, I did the whole hand trembling thing. That worked. Calling from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, can you hear me?
Yeah. Who's this?
Hey, it's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas. What's on your mind, bud?
Hey, I just want to say a great election day show. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just had some things on my mind. I just feel like nowadays, if it ever was, racism is not disqualifying for the right wing or the right. I mean, it's just not disqualifying. In fact, Donald Trump ripped the veneer off. It even might boost bona fides in some places.
Yep, I think that's absolutely right.
Right, and this kind of segues into your guest that you had on today. He's a very good show, by the way, because I really like that guest. But I just feel like because you're talking about cable news and the right wing networks and stuff. One thing I kind of see as a black person, is whether it's Fox News or MSNBC or CNN, whatever, when it comes to, I guess, black people in the news, there's always a continuity of, black on black crime statistics and all this other garbage that they kind of push, and whether it's like, again, the supposedly quote unquote liberal MSNBC to Fox News, there's always a continuity of, I don't want to say overtly racist because, now it's overtly racist on Fox. I mean, let's be clear. But, they always push this stuff when it comes to black people. They're always talking about, again, black on black crime, poverty and stuff like that. And I feel like, remember Breitbart before it really exploded. Breitbart was pretty much a black crime blotter. Right. Right-wing conspiracy stuff, but also a black crime blotter. And I just think, because because by the way, I completely agree with your guest, but as a black person, I just see a continuity among the discussion of black news and I guess black public discourse, and also when you bring a lot of black people on in the media, it's always good to discuss like racism and stuff. It's never about power or any real tangible things, because of course you might rock the boat too much. And the one thing I'll say, Sam, then you can comment. The one thing I kind of see, is that any attempt, because they'll pathological. I mean, they'll I guess make black behavior pathological, or they'll try to make it seem that way.
Right.
Whereas any attempt to pathologize, white criminal behavior, I should say, like mass shootings and stuff like that, for example, that's the most in your face one. White males in particular are very hypersensitive to that, and they'll push back and cry and do all these phony grievances and stuff. And and for me, that plays into white supremacist hands, because if you can never criticize these people, if you can never really take them into account, you let them practice unreality. And that goes back in that feedback loop that the gentleman was talking about.
Right.
If you can ever criticize these guys, they just feed into the loop. So let me just wrap this up, Sam, and I guess I want to hear your points. But when you push all this black narrative, also to Hispanics and Jews, the globalists or stuff like that to a lesser extent, but a lot of the bigotry is based on blackness. That's where it extends from in the country, but it goes to other races. But then you never criticize white male criminal behavior and stuff like that. It feeds directly right into that loop. When you don't prosecute these guys, when you don't prosecute the criminal behavior and the racism, it just gives carte blanche, or at least tacit. Okay, it's okay. It's almost like white is a tabula rasa in the society.
Absolutely. I appreciate the phone call. No, I think that's true. And I mean, we see this. It's most stark, at least in terms of like these shootings, right? Someone with a Muslim name shoots, it becomes a Muslim problem. Someone goes in and shoots 10 people. If a white guy goes in and shoots, it's an individual problem.
There's no doubt about that. My only slight pushback is my impulse would be to try to not talk about crimes like that generally, one way or another. I just, like, as an example, I think we need to be shrinking specifically with terrorism. I want to shrink the usage of that word as much as possible.
Yeah.
Outside of very specifically
I agree.
the Ku Klux
Barn,
Klan, Al-Qaeda.
That horse is out of the barn. I mean, sadly. I mean, I agree with you. If we had the ability, if I could program everything, I would.
Well, I can program myself. I mean, that's at least what I do because I'm not going to jump on that like every atrocity is terrorism bandwagon. I at least want to try to use it in a fairly narrow way to denote, like, as I say, the Ku Klux Klan, Al-Qaeda. Like, what happened in Charlottesville is terrorism. That was politically motivated, ideological violence. I don't think every mass shooting, I would say. Right. There are atrocities, mass murders. I don't want to keep broadening that terminology.
But put aside the terrorism, the thing. The idea is less about what they call it and more about what a function of it is. In other words, look, the vast majority of our mass incident shooters are white guys within a certain age. And nobody talks about there's something intrinsic to whiteness at that age and maleness at that certain age that creates these things. Whereas if it is a Muslim person, it immediately gets, that's my point.
That's undoubtedly true. I just in general, specifically with crime things, I see the danger of playing that game one way or another.
I know what you're saying.
Because even like with mass shooting incidents, it's
so the guy, in other words, you're saying the guy in California was not a terrorist.
No.
Right. No, I agree. I agree.
I would also like to shrink the carceral state, and I caution against any suggestions or prescriptions that involve growing it, because the way our society is right now, that is primarily going to affect people of color and poor people still. But if we're going to have jails, we might as well put racists and murderer cops in them. I do agree with that.
All right, let's go to the phones. Calling from a 559 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Marco from Fresno, California.
Marco, what's on your mind?
Yeah, to address this racist issue that you guys, white liberals, are always dealing with, and not to put you in that category, I'm sorry, but, you know, education, education is what actually stops racism. I mean, the more educated people are, the more they are lack to be racist. You know,
is that true though?
When you know history,
Marco, hold on for
when
a
you
second.
know real history
Marco?
about the contributions of African Americans, and you know the contributions of, and I'll bring this conversation back to what we're talking about and what you're talking about, the politics of today. But a few weeks ago, you guys were having this conversation about racism and why people are. I don't know. That's just what I took from it. But you know, I publish a black newspaper here in Fresno, and I listen to different media outlets and stuff, and I really respect you guys. But you guys are way off on certain things. One thing is education takes away racism. When you're educated and you know the facts about the contributions of different people in different cultures, that is what really stems the racism thing.
Marco,
And,
let me ask you this.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you have data that suggests that? I mean,
No, I don't.
I mean, I would imagine.
No, I really
don't.
No,
I would imagine.
No, my brother.
I would imagine.
My brother, I don't.
Well, I would imagine that there's some correlation, although I don't know, and I mean I think like what is clear is that the more time you spend with people who you have racist thoughts of, that those diminish.
There's actually, at least when I looked at this, the research actually indicated, at least that I saw, was it wasn't just time. It was actually specifically time when you're either in a peer-to-peer or actually like they're your boss relationship. So in other words, if it's like
Depends
spend
on
a
what
lot
the
of
social
time
structure
with right, so it's like maybe every day you're seeing people that you have racist attitudes for, and they're, I don't know, working at the coffee shop you go to, that didn't have as much of an ameliorative effect as like actual interaction.
But Marco, let's just assume that your assessment that racism is a function of lack of education,
Of ignorance.
Yeah. Okay.
And actually, you know what? Racism is. You know what? I'm trying to get a book together right now, and talk about racism as a mental illness, because it's a paranoia. It's actually a paranoia.
Well, listen.
It's a mental illness.
Tomorrow,
and if we describe it as a mental illness, then we can function it. We can treat people. We can educate them.
Well, the problem is, though, Marco,
there's two ghosts. It's like being scared of aliens. Or
but
whatever.
Here's the problem, Marco.
It's non-existent.
Marco, here's the problem. All right, and tomorrow on the program, we're going to have a guy on who has written a book that with two other people that has data that it's really fascinating.
It's a mental illness.
That this mental illness was enhanced under by the election of Barack Obama, and here's the problem. Okay.
No, man. Listen.
Well, wait a second, Marco. Let me finish.
Even white,
Marco.
Marco. Hold on,
no,
my brother.
you hold on.
Even
Hold on.
white
You hold on.
liberals,
Wait, Marco. You got to let me finish what I'm saying.
Every white person in this country has grown up under the expectations and the assumptions that we are 3/5 a human. We are monkeys to all y'all. That's how black folks see it. We see it, and I'm just giving you how black folks see you guys, and CNN and Fox and all you guys. We put you all in the same category. You guys see us as monkeys. That's how we think you see us. Now, and I would go back to Plessy versus Ferguson. I'm willing to be separate and equal. Just make us equal. I don't want to live next to you guys. I'm at a point now.
Marco.
Look, listen, in this society right now,
yeah,
I'm so frustrated as a black man and as a black publisher of a newspaper that's been here for over 50 years in Fresno, California. You know what I mean? I'm so frustrated to the point where I'm about to run for office myself, and just make me separate but equal. I don't trust y'all, none of y'all, because all y'all have grown up in this institutional thing where we're monkeys. Now it demonstrates itself more substantially with racists and right-wing people or whatever, but even white liberals. I mean, white women voted for Donald Trump.
Well, yeah. No, I don't think they would identify themselves as white liberals that voted. But let me tell you what, Marco.
No, I'm just saying,
Marco,
white women.
Marco, are you going to let me say anything? Are you going to let me say anything? Okay.
Go.
Tomorrow on the program, we have a guy on. I don't know what color he is. I think he's white. But he is going to talk about research.
Of course he's white.
Of course
and he's probably a liberal.
Well,
and he's grown up in this society.
It's very possible.
I'm a monkey.
All right. Well, listen. I don't know, Marco, if he thinks that.
And how it affects his life.
Marco, are you not going to let me speak? No. Are you going to take over the show? Because if you are, I gotta move forward. If you want to do the show, because I got to break, I got to record something later. So you could do the show, and I'll record.
Go ahead.
All right. So just let me say something.
Go ahead.
So tomorrow, the guy.
Fault. My bad. Okay. I'm just emotional. You know what I mean?
I know.
Yeah.
I get it. I I don't blame you for it, but you just got to let me speak.
Yeah, brother.
The guy's coming on, and his the data that they have done, and it includes also, self-identified white liberals. I don't know what they use the terminology. Maybe they use Democrats in this context.
Yeah.
That the election of Obama drove some people crazier. And it basically made that mental disease that you talk about. It enhanced it.
Yes.
For some, for others, it made them. It had the weird effect of like, well, I don't know, it's weird, but made more ambivalent whites actually more sensitive to the questions of race. Now you can debate that, but this is what I'm suggesting. Listen to the program tomorrow. Call back in with your reaction.
White women have never been in support of the black community.
Well,
it was white
some.
women
I mean, listen.
that got Emmett Till lynched. It was white women that claimed. I mean, no. Just hear where our black communities come from. I'm telling you the truth, man. You know what I mean? We cannot trust white folks. Period. For y'all to sit there and even discuss the issue of if Donald Trump is lying or not or whatever, to just hear that on CNN or where, it's insulting. Of course he's lying.
I don't think that we.
Of course
I don't think we're debating.
Of course.
I don't think we're debating it, Marco. I just
insulting.
don't think that we're debating it. And I mean, I don't think we're debating it. I think I can understand your perspective on this, but I don't think your assessment of what we're doing is accurate. And so, I mean, but I can tell you, listen tomorrow. I think
you're just tainted, though.
What?
You have to understand, you have grown up as a white liberal man in the society. You still are tainted by institutional racism.
I get that.
All of your crew there has to accept the fact that you don't quite get it. You have to get black guests on to help you get it. That's all I'm saying.
Marco,
you guys get it better than anybody I've ever heard.
Yeah, well, and I think we do a decent job of having black guests on.
You do. You do a great job. But you still have grown up in this institutional society.
I get that. Marco, I don't think there's anything.
Monkeys.
I don't think there's anything.
To a certain extent.
I don't think there is any time you have heard.
You still date white
program.
women too, Sam.
That's true. Look, I think.
Who's defending white women?
Wait a second. Listen,
that?
Marco. That was Michael. Just
there's
please.
many black men
All right, I get
over white women.
I gotta
lies.
I gotta jump.
Who's
I gotta jump.
defending white women?
Marco,
Let's
nobody's defending white women. We're going to
Nobody is defending white women. They're the worst.
And they overwhelmingly vote for Trump.
All right, listen. Marco,
So
listen to me.
Defend them. Defend
nobody's
white
defending
women,
anybody.
please.
You listen
Try
on
that.
this program. we have said multiple times that we are fully own the fact that we all practice white supremacy on some level, Marco.
Yes. All y'all are white supremacists to a certain extent.
Yes,
You are just lesser
and I think there's
than
some
Donald Trump and all of them.
I think there's some truth.
You guys are just lesser.
All right, Marco,
white
I'm going to have to let you go.
to
buddy.
us.
I'm going to have to let you go. But I appreciate the call. Listen to tomorrow's program, okay? All right,
I thought he definitely had you on the white woman thing, Sam.
He almost got me in a corner with the white woman thing.
Yo, I get it.
I love white women. You stop
Jamie,
it, sir.
don't even try.
Yeah, don't you better keep your mouth shut. We've already heard enough about the devilish nature of the white woman for one day.
Oh my God.
Enough.
No, I was just
Enough
gonna
with your
say,
Yakubian ways.
On one level, I know not all men are bad just because we live under patriarchy. I'm married to a man. On another level, sometimes I'm like, fuck men. Men are trash. So
In any
system
we're living in,
got away with what
we're not as
Marco
bad as
said.
white women.
But
white women are the
cares?
worst.
It's just
Who cares
redundant.
what
Listen
I
to
think
Marco.
anyway?
Yeah,
It's
white
just,
women are very.
Yakubi
White
and
women have
Jezebel.
been navigating and bobbing and getting away with it, and we see it. And in any system, white women are the worst. I'm
All
with
right.
you, Marco.
Look.
I'll host you on TMBS. Much
Look.
love.
So
unless you're a patron of
listen,
TMBS, then
I
you've escaped your conditioning.
I
white women,
don't
sorry.
know how anybody could ever accuse anyone of running on racism in this country, except for if they just watch, maybe a day's worth of news in this country. Here is, this is Cindy Hyde-Smith. She is a Senate would-be, or I should say she is a Senate incumbent from Mississippi. She is going to be running off. There's going to be a runoff election in, when is this, in mid-December?
Mid-December, yeah.
Against Mike Espy. Wasn't he like a...
He was ag, I think, under Clinton.
Yeah, Clinton administration.
Very highly moderate to, I would say, conservative Democrat.
Yeah, running in Tennessee. He is a black man. And here is Cindy Hyde-Smith. She's not trying to activate any of this stuff at all. And we should say, again, tomorrow on this program, really interesting interview, hopefully it'll be interesting, about data that shows that, that people's racism, certain people, was activated under Trump, under Obama. And that Trump brings it out. And this is the same methodology. Just want to remind you, my candidate is a black man.
I would fight a circle song for him if he invited me to a public hanging. I'd be on the front row.
All right, so this is, and you could hear it because of the train a little bit, but she is with, who is she standing with? Who is it? Her husband? No, she was standing with another politician, I think, and she was basically saying that if I got invited, I would go. If he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be in the front row.
Oh, she was with Colin Hutchinson, a cattle rancher. Who was
okay. Yeah, it's just a big, a VIP in town.
A lot of ways you can take that.
And she's saying to a crowd, small people, if he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be in the front row. Now, I don't know what public hangings they had in Mississippi. Well, I do. I think we all know. And I guess, she's just saying, it's just a saying. It's just a saying.
It's a common phrase.
It's just saying that even if I had to go to something distasteful that wasn't you wanted to be in the front row, I would go there. And
was she trying to say that she likes him with that?
Yeah, that's saying that I would follow this guy anywhere.
But still with, a huge dash of racist hinting.
Right. I just wanted to let you know that, no, maybe it's never occurred to her in all the years that she's been saying that that idiom, right? That's what it is. That it refers to the public hanging of black men. I wonder,
teachable moment then.
Yeah.
Yeah, some idioms are pretty fucked up.
That's true. And maybe given the opportunity, she would say, you know what? I'm sorry. Now that I say it and I think about it, I mean, certainly, look, I've said this before. I was on cable news, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I said off the reservation. Never occurred to me what the implications of that saying were. Hey, just something you grow up, you saying it,
right?
And so there it is. But when people pointed it out to me, I said, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm not going to use that anymore because, yeah, it is. It is offensive. So let's play her apology after she is told that this is highly offensive. Oh, I guess she never apologized. Huh.
Nice.
There it is.
I don't know. She seems like a nice lady. I would show up for her hanging.
Yeah. I don't think you said that right. Jonathan Armistead, could everyone in their office share their SAT scores? For the life of me, I don't know that.
I took the ACT.
I didn't take one.
32.
Really?
Bates didn't require one. Talked my way into college, people.
There you go.
I know mine, but I'm not the kind of person who wants to tell everyone.
You're trying to act like you're
it
not
sounds
like
like
Chuck
somebody
Schumer.
got like
it
a-
sounds like somebody's like, I don't want to say. It was a
what's
very
100%?
healthy number.
What's 100%? What was it?
1,600.
I'm not saying shit.
Yeah. Total prep school suburb score.
Wow.
A lot of SAT prep going on in the Peck
Horse show
household.
I did not
hero.
prep.
Oh, I went to.
I think this is because apparently Chuck
Kaplan's or
Schumer
Barton's or something like
likes to tell people about his perfect SAT
Those
score. I think
those
this is what-
Kaplan stuff apparently have no effect on
Really?
scores. Yeah.
I used to teach
I
at
get to hang out
Kaplan.
with kids though. It was fun. Horseshoe. Hey, Horseshoe Hero. Hey Sam, have you seen the video I did giving my thoughts on Corporate Hill 69, talking about Rick Scott winning in Florida? If it wasn't for DWS working against Tim Canova and selling nuclear weapons under the table, North Korea General Sukmi, the election would be settled by now.
Canova's going nuts down there.
Tucker's Undamageddon door. Has anyone else noticed that Ed Rollins looks like Never Trumper? All right, look, whoever this one person is, keeps spamming. You can't do that. Ice Black Coffee. Just a reminder that Cory Gardner, John Cornyn, Susan Collins, John Kyle, David Perdue, Lindsey Graham, Tom Tillis, Shelley Moore Capito are running face re-election in 2020. There's more, yes. Glass-Steagall. Thoughts on governor's race losses in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont, Maryland, and almost Connecticut. Dems aren't even getting their core voters fully on board and away from Republicans. This seems to be a serious underreported problem. Well, first off, you're talking 3 of those states, 4 of them are New England states where there is a Massachusetts has had plenty of Republican governors, at least in modern times. And they're Mitt Romney, Bill Weld. That's,
What's the deal there?
It's because they don't function like the rest of the Republican Party in many respects. There's some sort of like strains in sort of weird conservatism, but they won't go.
At least the guys in Massachusetts and Vermont were, they opposed Trump enough to satisfy people.
Yep.
They're pro-choice. They fund the environment. They don't dismantle, like. They are a type of Republican, which is obviously not our politics, but truly doesn't exist on the national level, and people like voting that contrast.
And well, that's the thing is that there's also some evidence there, which I don't necessarily appreciate, is what people want is not necessarily something further to the left than like I'll keep your taxes low.
Well, that's I think another thing that's still. I mean,
Connecticut was a function of Malloy being a very,
people
very
hated that guy.
Unpopular, and in Maryland, I think it's just a guy is popular.
He did the same thing though.
Yep.
His campaign ads that I saw for Larry Hogan were about how he increased money for education spending. That was his main thing. But also, wouldn't you say it's also just that while Democrats are getting more partisan, they just still are not at that level. Like they just don't vote the way Republicans do yet.
That's right, and I think part of that came from what we heard, in the interview today. Secret Identity Politics, terrifically depressing interview today, though perhaps consider renaming it Why You Can't Save Your Family. As an aside, if racism is cured by education, then we might as well say high property taxes make you less racist. Holy shit, I need to read that guy's newspaper. Boy, that is a real public hanging an honorary Harvard Law degree. Nefertiti, can I get a shofar, please? I just passed my thesis defense. Yes, congratulations.
Oh, congratulations. That's awesome.
DX Fool, hello proletariats, and happy belated third anniversary of the weekend of the end of the weekday edition of Ring of Fire. That attempt to fill in the void caused by Ed Schultz and Randy Rhoads leaving over-the-air radio. Oh, thank you. I didn't realize that was. Do you know why Ring of Fire lost its Chicago affiliate earlier this month? Yeah, I think the owner of that place had an issue with some of my critiques. I think so. I mean, I think they also wanted money for the weekend. I'm not sure. Also,
why aren't you playing the victim more?
Huh?
Why aren't you playing the victim more?
I
That's
guess
money.
it's so many other things I got going on that.
So many ways that I'm a victim.
Exactly. Exactly. Just like the way that my kids treated me last night. Yuma is closer to the border than Maricopa County and has a huge detention center. Podcaster Brad Friedman has repeatedly called out Maricopa for voter obstruction by closing polling sites in non-white precincts. Peaches. Self-commissioned officer. I bet Donald looked really comfortable back in America when Agent Orange was raining on the soldiers in Vietnam. Winnipeg Craig. Michael, I love the beard. Blacks Marxist. Ojeda was a nice story in West Virginia. We can't have a Trump guy like him on stage in the debates. Sanders, Beto, Gillum, Warren, and Sherrod are my top choices. I don't want to talk 2020. D'Souza Palooza. Voter turnout was 93% in my former stomping grounds of Madison, Wisconsin. Bye-bye, Scott Walker. Really cool. The NRA needs to be labeled as a terrorism promoter. If we could restore the fairness doctrine in the VRA, how should they be structured? How should they be structured? The fairness. Well, the Voting Rights Act. I think you'd need legal experts to sort of divine from the Supreme Court what would constitute a pre-clearance need. I think maybe you come up with some type of formula, but that it deals with voter representation. I'm not sure. In terms of the fairness doctrine, I say let it rip, and let's destroy the medium on radio, talk radio. It'll destroy it, and I love it. Do it. I called for it even when, like the first week that I was on air, and
it was one of the first week of Hebrew school.
I was one of the few people. Louise Slaughter, who has passed away, I believe, Congresswoman from upstate.
Oh, really?
She held. Has she passed away?
I didn't know that.
I don't know if she has.
What about, did Jose Serrano work on that too?
I don't know. Louise Slaughter was the big promoter of it. I went down to D.C. and I was the only talk radio host who would come down there because it would destroy the medium, and I didn't. I'm happy to.
Yeah, she passed away in March.
Yeah.
Speaking of deaths, Stan Lee died.
Stan Lee died,
Really?
huh? No more cameos.
Calling from a 602 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 602?
Is that me?
Yep.
Oh, hi. First time caller. I'm actually very surprised I got through. I'm Danny from Arizona. So I've actually been paying close attention to what you guys have been saying about the elections here. And I've been trying to check every day just to see, I'm not a cinema fan, but I'm glad that she took the lead. Yeah. And it's just funny, to hear the dum-dum side of things, talking about, not voting out of fear, just because, we're an immigrant family.
Yeah.
And my wife is the only one in my family that can vote. I'm a resident. She's actually a citizen. And the reason she voted is because for cinema and not the Green Party candidate, who, even though she dropped out, she still got 2% of the vote because she dropped out when it was already too late to take her off the ballot. So, with everything going on the national stage and the stories you hear about people being stripped of residencies and even citizenships,
right.
People not being allowed to come back into the country. When I hear, just brain dead people talking about, voting, not voting out of fear, voting your conscience, whatever. It's just upsetting to me that there isn't enough solidarity for, minority issues in this country. And, it's just one of those things where
it's an incredible, I mean, on one level, it is an incredible exhibit of privilege, right? Like, because they don't have the same amount of fear, and they don't have the same amount of justification for that fear that someone in your position does. In addition, they're also ignorant to, all the reasons why you vote and what they should be fearful of. But the bottom line is there are real people who have real material concerns that are more or less life and death about why they should be afraid for certain people to get elected. And I'm with you. Kristen Sinema is pretty close to the last person I would want elected out of that state, except for the Republican,
She's such trash that even when she was left, she was trash.
Right. But
she's trash.
But
far better than McSally, no doubt.
Without a doubt. And there are two people on the ballot who could win. One person who certainly, I don't know what percentage of those Green voters would vote for Sinema. Maybe all of those people would not come out and vote whatsoever.
That's actually a question I have for you. Do you think we could start maybe with some of those Green voters? It might be fair to getting to the point where you're like, oh, these people are just not up for grabs.
But even if those 50,000, even if she doesn't take those percentage points, right, that would increase the percentage that Sinema would have. So even if they didn't show up at the polls, she would be further away outside of like a recount, outside of any doubt about her vote, because she would be winning by a higher percentage. So, yeah. Well, I think it's looking good for Sinema there, and hang in there, Danny. That's all I can tell you is that it's hopefully the things will improve for folks in your situation. But yeah, I understand. I appreciate why you'd be nervous. It's a very bad time in this country for immigrants, for folks who have various status of immigrants, who have family, etc. I mean, it's bad. I don't know what else to tell you, but
it's bad for all minorities, I feel like, right now.
I think that's true.
And one thing I appreciate, and I started listening to you guys, I think it's been like probably a year now. Ever since the Mike Cernovich thing happened, luckily it made a big enough splash, and then I Googled and decided to listen. One of the things I appreciate that you guys do, and I wish more people on the left would do it, is to talk about voting as not, like a self-expression thing, but, as a civic duty. And as a civic duty, you got to think about the benefit of the whole, not the individuals.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate that you guys talk about it in that sense.
Well, I appreciate the call, Danny. Thanks so much.
Sounds like you're motivated by fucking fear. And you're trying to fucking manipulate us. Fuck you. Fuck off.
Thanks for the call, Danny.
So I say vote third party, no matter what, no matter where you are. I don't care.
We should just have like a sound drop if somebody's getting deported.
It's not, I mean, you don't have to believe that it's a civic duty, although I think it is, for you to vote. But it's also just like it is a tool to build something or to, prevent the onslaught of something. It is not a mode of self-expression. Nobody knows how you voted unless you tell them. And guess what? You don't have to tell them the truth.
Yeah, but dating white women is, huh, Sam?
When I go and vote against Cuomo in the primary and the general, that's kind of about self-expression.
There may have been a little self-expression going on in my Howie Hawkins vote. I'm going to own that.
It is great to have you be able to stroke your ego and make yourself feel good about yourself, and to actually have that align with what's best for society and for the goals that you supposedly espouse. That's nice when that happens, but that's just nice when that happens.
Well, no, it was fun voting for Howie Hawkins. It's like, because even the other side of it is easy when it's like the type of people who are like, yeah, Cuomo leads by 50 points, but you just need to, because, you know, like the sort of like neurosis of like, you need to vote for Democrats at all times, no matter what, because that's the only choice. And it's like, well, no, actually, that's the only choice if you live in a swing state in the presidential election.
You were not going to hand the election to the Republican.
And in fact, if I thought it was actually in question, then I would have to submit to voting for Andrew Cuomo. But luckily, I've never been put in that position. So I was able to vote for a nice labor guy upstate who was wasting his talents with the Green Party.
One more phone call, and then we're going to have to just take some IMs and go, because I got to do a pre-tape. Calling from a 206 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Justin from Maine.
Justin from Maine. What's on your mind? Got to be quick.
All right. Okay, this question's for Jamie, okay? I'll be quick. Mm-hmm. So I've been thinking about it, and I've been trying to figure out where I fall on the spectrum these days. I've kind of always been a social democrat, but everybody's a democratic socialist these days. I don't know if I'm a socialist. I'm not sold on it. So, Jamie, I pulled two questions from Sam's deadly interviews from back in the day with those libertarian nut jobs. And I want to know how you fare with them, being that you're an anarcho-communist. So, Jamie,
yes.
How do you establish and defend property rights, and who builds the roads?
Is this a trick question?
Nope, because you're an anarchist, and
I don't
go
believe
ahead,
in private property. So nobody. How do we build the roads? We self-organize in workers' councils, and we get it done.
Gulags, slave labor, sir, for people who need to be
re-educated. That sounds a lot like Walter Block. That sounds like you can't ask me, Sam, how
right,
to,
Justin.
what it'll
Now
be
you
like
lost
in
me,
a free society.
Now you lost me. That does not sound like him at all. I appreciate the call,
Are you
Justin.
accusing me of being a right-wing libertarian?
You are a white woman.
I mean,
all right,
that's
Justin,
true.
thanks for the call.
Guilty of that. I will say...
And you have been the Edward R. Moreau of this whole process.
No property rights and workers' councils on the roads.
Yeah, man.
And you're not just
self-organized.
I don't think I'm getting across the logic of it.
And, I say I'm an anarcho. Oh, my God. I should not try to be serious right now about this.
No, I don't think you should be too serious about it. I mean, but the workers' councils obviously would have to communicate to themselves.
You can't centrally plan freedom, Sam. You're a horrible person.
I mean, I don't claim to have all the answers either for how we're going to organize society after capitalism, because a lot of it's going to be contingent on the time, the place, the conditions, all that shit. Marx said, it's not up to me to write out receipts for the cook shops of the future.
Got a mom.
I do think that humans have the capability to organize society without being told what to do by the ruling class. So there we go. And you can't have political freedom without economic freedom. And that is the difference between right and left-wing libertarians.
Indeed. That's right. So suck it.
Really cool. I did that. Dr. Chaos, could we radicalize people and maybe convert some conservatives by using the same language they do? Disingenuous hyperbole? Well, we try, but
You look at our YouTube titles.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Bughetto.
Yeah, that's a little hurtful. I feel like we've been putting a lot of effort into that.
Bughetto, I didn't know you took calls from hoteps.
I don't know what hoteps are. I just want my white woman to be left alone. Marco, are you going to let me defend beautiful white woman, or are you going to talk? This is my show. You don't call and insult those beautiful fair flowers while I'm hosting, Marco. Take your Nation of Islam medallion somewhere else.
Okay. Attorney Andrew. In anticipation of tomorrow's teaser, I have a possible wild goose chase for MR listeners. I recall listening to either an episode on the Media or Best of Left from 2010, where they discussed a study finding that by the 1950s, the term public, when used to discuss policy, had become synonymous with black or African Americans, such that policy is described as benefiting the public. Voters heard that it would help African Americans. You know who did this? I think Martin Gillens did some of this research too, or his, I think it was Gillens. Same study, a segment discussed that how an equal percentage of Americans in the early 1900s had the same opinions on affirmative action for African Americans when necessary, because slavery was a long time ago. I think it was Martin Gillens who did that research in regards to welfare. I turn your show off because of Marco, says Denver Dave. Okay. And Bonar, this caller is equal turns frustrating and fascinating. Isn't it possible that a bunch of the voters who voted green in the Arizona race are just people who had no idea who to vote for and picked green just because it sounds good and different? Maybe. Doe. As for DJT going to a cemetery in France, I was praying you wouldn't be visiting a cemetery where my father is buried. There are 11 military cemeteries in France. They're kept in pristine condition with French staff and other citizens. American visitors treating them with utmost respect. I did not want his presence there in that sacred place. All right. I got 3 more here. Sorry. Colin Powell. George W. Bush. Colin P.O.W. George W. Bush did the coin toss at the Veterans Day night NFL game of the Eagles versus the Cowboys. Watching that piece of shit who created a generation of disabled veterans normalized on national TV reminds me how he ended up with Donald Trump as our president. If Trump gets out of office and not held to account for his criminal activity in support of the 2016 election fraud, who will end up being our next Republican president? Ted Nugent? Look, I will definitely say, I mean, I don't know about his election fraud as much as all the other things that he's doing that are fraudulent, I think, in office. I mean, the emoluments just being one of them in terms of corruptness. But there is without a doubt both the lack of account that George Bush and other of his ilk who were held to under the Obama administration is a problem. And also the media, when they allowed Paul Ryan 5 or 10 years ago to lie about the deficit or lie about his dumb tax plans or the Laffer curve or whatever this stuff is, stuff that was demonstrably untrue, when they allowed for this stuff because, well, he's a congressman, we need to show him some respect, or he's a leader of the party, we need to show some respect. The public can figure it out about the Laffer curve. When they used all these justifications that it's not my job to truth check these politicians, when they allowed for that, that's why they were so ill-equipped to deal with Donald Trump and the Republican Party that exists now. They had the muscle never developed or atrophied in terms of questioning these people. European brochure. If Georgia goes to a runoff, I call upon my fellow Europeans to write or call their MEPs to push to send EU observers, indeed. And the final I am of the day. Kankel phone minute truce. I can't. What the hell has been going on in Fresno for the last 50 years? It's deep in the Republican part of California. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah.